on today's episode.
I think it was that night or else top of the next morning where the medical people listed all the problems that she likely would have. Only some of those came true, and then said, do you want her to be treated or not? A non-treatment would have meant this opening where the spinal cord came out of the canal, and because she needed surgery, and to send her home with us just bandaging and let infection set in, and it would lead to death. Thankfully, we were grounded in our faith and didn't even consider that. Well, of course we'd want to have her treated, and so she had a major surgery the very next morning after she was born.
Welcome to the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. People today face many opportunities and struggles when it comes to issues of life and death, marriage and family, health and science. We're here to bring a fresh biblical perspective to these issues and more. Join us now for Life Challenges.
Hi, and welcome back. I'm Krista Potratz, and I'm here today with Pastor Jeff Samuelson. And today we have a special guest with us. We have Lindy Spencer. So welcome, Lindy. We really appreciate having you on the podcast today. Lindy is so kind to come on today and really share with us her story and her experience. And we specifically really wanted to touch on the topic of talking about raising a child with special needs, and this topic for all of our listeners too. I think a lot of people maybe personally don't have a story with raising somebody in that situation, but maybe know somebody. I mean, it can touch a lot of different people too. And so we really just find, having people on that can share their story just is really beneficial to a lot of people and a lot of our listeners as well. So thank you so much for coming on, Lindy. And I think, I'll just throw the ball to your court here. And if you can share just a little bit of your background and your story with us.
Oh, sure. Well, I'm happy to be here. And my husband and I are high school sweethearts. Early in our marriage then, unfortunately, we had a miscarriage first. And then after that, we were pregnant with our daughter, and she's the one who has special needs. And she was born with spina bifida many years ago, actually. She's an adult now. And so we had quite a journey. We didn't have any experience with spina bifida or really with a major disability in our family. So we ended up with lots of life issues that we dealt with, both in her initial treatment, and then eventually our family had secondary infertility and another miscarriage, and that led us to adoption also, which was always in my heart. So we have one daughter with spina bifida, and then our son is 10 years younger, and he joined us through adoption.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. It really does sound like you have experience here with the areas of life challenges and the different things that we talk about here on the podcast. You mentioned too, just kind of at the beginning with treatment with your daughter when she was younger. Can you maybe kind of expand a little bit on that, and even to like just maybe when you realized that she had spina bifida and that process?
This was, feels like quite a while ago. It was back in the early 1980s, and we were both young and newly married, and she was born, and unfortunately, we didn't know about the spina bifida until on the delivery, till she was born. Nowadays, they have so much more testing and things available so that you can plan medically and as a family also. But back then, she was born. My doctor was gone, and so the fill-in doctor, she was actually born breech, which added to problems. And there too, these days, if they know you're going to be delivering a child with spina bifida, it's kind of recommended to do a C-section, so the opening on the back doesn't go through all the trauma of the birth canal. But there again, we were back in the 80s. So she was born, and we hadn't heard of spina bifida. They used the word myelomeningocele. That sounded very foreign too. She was transferred immediately to a children's hospital, and then the question came to us. I'm trying to think if it was, we had her baptized right away in the hospital. We brought our pastor there, and I think it was that night or else top of the next morning where the medical people listed all the problems that she likely would have. Only some of those came true, and then said, "Do you want her to be treated or not?" A non-treatment would have meant this opening where the spinal cord came out of the canal, and because she needed surgery, and to send her home with us just bandaging and let infection set in, and it would lead to death.
Oh,
Thankfully, we were grounded in our faith and like didn't even consider that. Well, of course we'd want to have her treated, and so she had a major surgery the very next morning after she was born, and we went from there. So it was having to make this big decision with a pretty negative outlook.
wow. That's a lot right at the beginning there, too.
Yeah, how did you cope with that? You were a very young couple. What were the things that you found helpful or perhaps unhelpful about dealing with that?
It really helped that we were grounded in our faith. I was actually teaching in a Lutheran elementary school at the time, and I had met with the pastor talking about baptism and that kind of information. And so our church and our faith were really helpful. We had that. Family is helpful, but they also kind of are struggling at the time too to understand why did this happen. And so it can be a mixed experience, but yeah, I would say that our faith was really what got us through because it was definitely overwhelming. And then connecting with other families and the support, the social worker who connected us with other families, and all of a sudden it became a little bit more normalized and we could ask just all the questions we needed to.
Once you got your daughter home and were starting to raise her, what were some of the challenges that you found as you were raising her?
Probably just navigating the whole medical system was one of them. We were new to that and young, and even realizing, I remember once we went to a specialist, it happened to be urology, and they gave an opinion about her needs. And then we consulted another one, and we ended up consulting three different urologists, so specialists, and they all had three somewhat different suggestions. And these are the specialists, and then they said, well, kind of, what do you want to do? And I'm like, oh. So it's times like that where, you reach out to other families, read. The resources were very helpful, being connected to a support system. There was a lot of information out on spina bifida, so we could check into that and then just pray about it and just try to make the best decision.
Yeah, when you mentioned to like reading things or even connecting with other families, I mean, right away, like my mind just goes to our online world.
Yeah.
Like, oh yeah, yeah, you just, joined a Facebook group like with the families in the area, or you got all this information at your fingertips. I mean, I just, I mean, I'm realizing that that's not probably what it was like for you at all.
Correct, yes. Oh, and, maybe you can help me remember when the internet really got going, but back then we didn't have texting, it was pick up the phone or grab a book, and that was about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was in high school in the 80s, so yeah, that's correct. We didn't have any of those things.
Sure. Whole different world now.
As you were raising your daughter and everything too, I mean, you talk just about how great that community was of people that knew what you were going through and that would support you. But what were maybe some challenges that you saw, maybe other people, or just something maybe that you wished that people understood more about your situation as you were raising your daughter?
Sometimes as a family, we couldn't like join in an activity or go to an event. And it wasn't because we didn't want to go or we're saying no to the people. It was looking at our family's needs and her needs specifically, and can this work? And that can be a little bit challenging. It can be a little sad sometimes too, but you need to prioritize your needs and then see how they can fit into the situation. And so trying to explain that to others would be one thing that can be a little bit difficult. Or it might seem like she's maybe not wanting to engage, and it's probably more so due to a limitation that she is challenged to initiate conversation. So it's not that she's antisocial or doesn't want to join in, it's just more of the disability or some limitations. And so the importance of others kind of reaching out to her makes a difference.
What kind of maybe effect did it have on your day to day, your typical day as a family?
It's a little bit hard to know because she was our first child, so we couldn't compare
Yeah.
it what
Uh-huh.
family life was like apart from my husband and I before that. But I would say we are probably needed to be a little bit more structured because there's timing of certain either, I don't know, medications or bathroom timing or certain different needs that she'd have, and a little bit more of being planned and being intentional, making those phone calls, setting up appointments. We kind of live by the calendar a little bit more, and just to make sure that everybody's needs were met. So it's not maybe quite as flexible as one would
Mhm.
be.
Yeah. Well, what would her experience have been like growing up then?
That was the only way Nicole knew that things were. I think of it when someone is able-bodied and then they have an accident or some kind of trauma and they lose function and how difficult that is. But for Nicole, she never did walk without assistance. And so she wheeled everywhere and that was her life. And she is described as the most pleasant person. God has just blessed her with a great spirit. And so what's lacking in toes that don't wiggle, just her spirit makes up for it. And she's already been honored by one of the nurses as patient of the year kind of thing. And, even in the hospital. We just feel very blessed I've learned from her and that kind of spirit. But otherwise, I would do home daycare, and she'd have people to play with. And we have a little booklet that shows two kids going to the ice cream store, and the boy is climbing up the steps, and right beside it is a ramp. And so the girl is wheeling up the ramp. So, still wanting to do the same things that everybody else does, but maybe having to do it in a different way. In fact, every year I'd go in and talk to her class, second or third day of school, either with the school nurse or the school guidance counselor, and we'd let the kids have a chance. We'd explain about disabilities and what's hard for everybody and what are you good at, and they could ask their questions. And that was always interesting. They'd say, "Well, how does she swim with her wheelchair?" 'Cause they picture Nicole in her chair, and so that idea, it's kind of like glasses that you put on and you need to wear, but then, you don't swim with them, and you don't go to bed with your wheelchair, and she could pop a wheelie, and, just, so they got to understand, and then it really seemed like that helped friendship, and, "Okay, now let's just go play," because
Yeah.
they got it. Yeah.
Hmm. No, it
No.
sounds really wise that you did that.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah, and the questions that you mentioned too with the kids, I mean, I can really see that. I have some young children right now too, and I mean, they just genuinely want to know how that all works. It's just it comes from a very sincere place.
Yeah, and once you address that fear of the unknown, then it just makes everything easier and they can just go play again. Yeah.
You mentioned too that you adopted your son 10 years after Nicole was born. How did that change the family dynamic? Was it different after that?
we love him to bits, and he was a very energetic guy. And so we felt like we had the whole gamut. I always wanted a kind of a big family, and I felt like I got a little bit of everything in with my 2, you know? Lord answered that just in a different way. And, so I guess the benefit and the need for 2 parents really showed up because often I'd be helping Nicole and addressing some of her needs, and my husband would be with our son, playing and interacting with him, or I'd try to make sure he could still have friends over and do all the typical things. And so we were pretty intentional that he was friends with our daughter, but not having to do any caregiving. I didn't think that that was a good idea. And yet he got to do some cool things that maybe would, like we would go and stay at the Ronald McDonald House when she'd have medical surgeries. And boy, that was the coolest place to play, and had a playroom, an arcade room. And so it was a whole family adventure. Try to make the best of all the situations. Yeah.
When you were talking to about just you mentioned like your husband and how you guys were doing that together too. I mean that really stood out to me. Yesterday I was with all 4 of my children at the dentist office, and the receptionist was like, wow, you're this is basically like, this is crazy, how do you do this? And I mean, to which I replied, I mean, I really am very blessed. I do not do this on my own. And I mean, my husband really helps quite a bit and has a great job to where he is able to be home in the evenings and on weekends and that type of thing too. And so, I just would love it if you'd maybe speak a little bit more to how you guys really worked together in this area and with your family.
That basic communication is so important. When I often would take Nicole to her doctor appointments, and he would stay at work so he didn't have to take vacation days. Sometimes that was a good idea. I don't know if it was always the best idea, but that's what we did. But I'd take notes. I'm a huge note taker. And then when we got home, I would share the notes. And we were living in small town northern Wisconsin, and so we would have to drive a number of hours to get to the doctor appointment and stay at Ronald McDonald or with a family. So sharing those notes and making sure everybody was aware and doing what we could that way. But I must say, support systems were really important too. Besides the 2 of us, we were connected actively with the spina bifida group, and so meeting other families, and you just didn't feel alone, and we could and sometimes, commiserate about the struggles, or we could say, "Hey, I got this great book," or "We found this great therapy center," and whatever it was, could share together, and that was very, very helpful. I have I really love support groups.
Yeah, no, that sounds really neat. And I can definitely see the benefit with that. Besides support groups, too, were there any other resources that you found really helpful?
Back then, I hope I can say it on here. I listen to Focus on the Family. Yeah, it had a lot of parenting type things and parenting kids with special needs. So that was very helpful
Mhm.
because you could be at home and doing your thing. Or, I mentioned the books, conferences, either one day, that kind of thing, where you'd all come together and have a number of the professionals speaking throughout the day and taking those notes and learning together. And then the people you were sitting with, who also were parenting kids with special needs, learning and sharing with them too. So support in what various ways, in that networking. And then certainly our church and our pastors were helpful too, supportive and encouraging.
What would you say has been the most rewarding part of being a parent with to a child with special needs?
Maybe that you learn to treasure the things that are really important, and you kind of it leads you to dig deeper, to look deeper. We don't have, again, toes that wiggle and certain things that other parents would kind of get excited about. But we can get very excited when that first rolling over happens, not at the time that maybe other kids rolled over, but when it does happen or a partial roll, you just celebrate and probably celebrate maybe even a little bit more because it took a little work to get there. It drove me into a deeper love too, to really appreciate her. And you find an inner strength, and I would say a God given strength that you really didn't know you had.
Yeah. Well, one of the thoughts that strikes me is, as you're talking about that, the idea of maybe a special kind of love or even more love in a way. And it's actually a good illustration for us of God's love for us because we make his life very difficult, so to speak. And yet he loves us all the more. And it's helpful sometimes to realize that he doesn't love us because we're so good, because we're so wonderful and imperfect. He loves us despite that. And it's just a thought that crossed my mind. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly we needed or we learned a deeper dependence on him too. I remember one time as she was maybe 5, 6, and Nicole's had numerous surgeries through the years that go with along with spina bifida, and they were actually carrying her through those doors that say no admittance for us as parents into a surgery, and really hard on a mom. And I had brought my Bible along, and I didn't even know where to look, and I just prayed through the tears and said, Lord, just lead me to something and, open the book. And he certainly did. But you're weak and depend on
Mhm.
his strength.
Your daughter is now an adult, but what would your advice be to people that are maybe just starting out on this journey? So maybe you just got a diagnosis, and maybe now it is an in utero diagnosis with something like this. What would your advice be to a young couple?
Probably just remember it's a he is a child first and disability second. And even the language that we use, not a disabled child, but a child with a disability. And remember, that's first and foremost the most important. You're not alone. It's okay to ask for help, and it's a good thing. It's actually, I think, a sign of strength and to reach out, not compare. They just kind of get stuck then if you compare to what others are doing at that same age, but just enjoy the child for who they are.
You have mentioned now with your child being an adult, what is life like for her now? Can you describe a little bit about the situation she's in today?
We're so proud of her, and she is so happy to be where she's at. She's a full-time wheelchair user, doesn't stand at all, and she is now in a house, moved out. She was happy to move out of her family home, from our home. She's got a strong sense of independence, and so we found a home that was advertised as one of Wauwatosa's earliest accessible homes. It had been built for a veteran coming back from World War II. So it had a lot of accessible features already in it. We did renovation, and so we followed the pattern of some others. There again, our networking. There was another family, similar situation. We learned a lot from them. So Nicole has the personal helpers come and go for the whatever she might need, if it's cooking assistance or personal care type thing. And we've got safeties put into place. And she has a roommate another young lady who wanted to move out from her family home too, has different needs than Nicole's, but it's just been a wonderful thing. And she's so happy to be at her place.
Sounds great.
For everybody, really. It's really what a normal type thing.
Yeah, was that a big adjustment for you to do that?
We were all pretty much ready, so it took a lot of things to get in place. It took us 2 years from the date of acquiring the house until it was fully ready, and it was during COVID, so she moved in and her caregivers would come with their masks on and, we just did it, and, yeah, there was a lot to get in place, but again, it would have been overwhelming had we not had some others to follow their pattern. So the importance of networking really came through.
It sounds like you've had a lot of ups, with your whole experience with this. I'm certain there were plenty of downs with bad days and difficult times and hard questions to answer. You mentioned when she was going into surgery and went through those doors and things like that. And you mentioned the most important thing, obviously, relying on the Lord. Were there any more practical things that you would say were really helpful for you in managing those ups and downs of life?
Along with celebrating any of the small steps, it's also grieving the losses. There isn't that time where she can run in the race like others run. And so to give yourself permission to grieve those losses, there was certainly plenty of tears, even that she kind of had to go to school at age 3 then, the Birth to 3 program, and away she went on the little minibus. And, you kind of felt like it wasn't as much a choice. She just needed it, and it was a good program. But I put her on the bus, and Nicole, being independent, and she wasn't speaking a lot, she said, "Mom," and pointed out the window like I needed to get off the bus so she could go to school. So I went in the house. She went off. I went in the house, had a good cry, called a friend, not even a friend with a child with a disability, but just a friend to talk it through and, a shoulder to cry on. Getting counseling as needed. I think that's always, who doesn't need support of that kind of thing in their life? And I think it's a helpful tool. Christian counseling specifically. Yeah.
You've mentioned really like this whole talk has been it's been sprinkled in, but just again, maybe where did you really draw your strength in your faith with everything in life, whether it is encouraging Bible passages or just things that truths of God that you really focused on over the years? What are just some places of strength that you went to in the Lord during your journey?
I remember I was teaching Sunday school and I went to a conference and was talking with the pastor and kind of feeling a little blue. And, that question came up about why me? And this pastor said, "Well, why not you?" And at first it was like, oh, that ouch a little bit, but he didn't mean it that way. It was, and then he went on to say, well, look at, you have advocated for her and loved her and met her needs. And what if she would have gone to another home that wasn't doing that for her? And so in that case, it was the pastor just really encouraging me to kind of get out of that low thinking mode and to reframe how I thought about it. So that was very helpful. I have one verse that I had just thought of recently from Lamentations. Though he brings grief, he will show compassion. So great is his unfailing love, for he does not willingly bring affliction or grief to the children of men. And kind of thinking of how God allows this, but it wasn't the initial creation in the Garden of Eden. The world is just not perfect, and we have sin and we have problems and struggles, and yet He works through it, and again has brought us to this point of like a deeper love and learning to be assertive that I wasn't before, and treasuring the small things. And so just seeing how God can work through those things for everyone's benefit.
Your mention of creation and Eden and perfection just made me think kind of toward the other end of things, that all of us have things that we're looking forward to about heaven, about the resurrection. I imagine you have a slightly different perspective on that in terms of what it's going to be like for you at the resurrection, seeing Nicole.
You think of leaping for joy and dancing and just all those kind of movements that go with happiness and that she'll be able to do. Um,
Mhm.
um, we get a lot of support from Johnny Erickson Tata too, and all that she's done in her ministry, and how many years in the wheelchair, and the lessons on suffering. And she talks too about just walking and praising the Lord, and so that whole image uh, just brings a lot of happiness. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as we kind of close out this episode and wrap things up a little bit, our podcast here is called Life Challenges. And really what we always, want to try to hit on is that even though there are these challenging moments in life, God is walking through it all the time with us. And also just like that importance of life too. And so is there just anything, to just let our listeners know, or would you like them to know on just the importance of life, the importance of your daughter's life, your own life, or just life in general?
And having Nicole, and then our infertility, and then adoption has really brought life issues to the forefront for us. And back again when she was born, and just the offer to not be treated. After that, I ended up serving for a brief time on the panel. I think we met in Madison, developing some of the baby doe laws, where, like, back then there was a child with Down syndrome that wasn't treated for their heart defect and allowed to die just because of their disability, and just helping to show that it's still a person first, and all the blessings that come from that. And yes, the disability can be very challenging, and it goes on. You become a perpetual parent, as one of her doctors said. Parenting goes on, just in a different format. But it is the person first, and the joys and creation by God, that you can just love and find something deep within, an inner strength that you didn't know you had.
Well, thank you so much, Lindy. We really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today. It was really wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much.
And we thank all of our listeners too for joining us. And if you have any questions on this topic or any others, you can reach us at lifechallenges.us. And we look forward to having you back next time. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Life Challenges podcast from Christian Life Resources. Please consider subscribing to this podcast, giving us a review wherever you access it, and sharing it with friends. We're sure you have questions on today's topic or other life issues. Our goal is to help you through these tough topics, and we want you to know we're here to help. You can submit your questions as well as comments or suggestions for future episodes at lifechallenges.us or email us at podcast@christianliferesources.com. In addition to the podcasts, we include other valuable information at lifechallenges.us, so be sure to check it out. For more about our parent organization, please visit christianliferesources.com. May God give you wisdom, love, strength, and peace in Christ for every life challenge.